Hello and welcome to the 2025 edition of Jerusalem of the Mind, the annual event sponsored by Mr. Gabriel Safdie, that I've had a privilege of being a part of for the third year in a row, which I think entitles me to tenure, unless attacks on DEI spread to Canada as well. My name is Kareem Shaheen. I'm the moderator of the event. I'm a Middle East editor at New Lines Magazine, former correspondent for The Guardian in the Middle East. We're going to start by introducing our panelists. First, Danae Elon is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, producer, and cinematographer. She's a recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Scholarship. Her films have screened in TIFF, Berlin, Tribeca, Leipzig, CPH Docs, IDFA, Doc NYC, Doc Aviv, Docker, and many others. Her latest film is Rule of Stone, which is premiered in the international competition at the International Documentary Film Festival. And in addition to her film work, Dani is an adjunct lecturer at Queen's University in the Department of Film and Media. Mustafa Bayoumi is the author of the critically acclaimed How Does It Feel to Be a Problem? Being Young and Arab in America, which won an American Book Award and the Arab American Book Award for Nonfiction. It has also been translated into Arabic. Also, he authored This Muslim American Life, Dispatches from the War on Terror, which was chosen as the best book of 2015 by the Progressive magazine and awarded the Arab American Book Award for Nonfiction. He's an accomplished journalist, a columnist for The Guardian, and a professor of English at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. Yaakov Repkin, a historian and public intellectual, has published on the interaction between science and politics, science and religion, the history of science and technology. His works on the history of Judaism, Zionism, and Israel, published in many languages, have become especially well known. And he's authored several books and over 100 scholarly articles. He's a professor of history at the University of Montreal in Canada since 1973, a graduate of Leningrad University. He completed postgraduate studies in the history of science at the USSR Academy of Sciences in Moscow. Last but not least, Ihab Lutaif is a Canadian poet, writer, community activist, and ID manager of Egyptian origin. As a poet and writer, Ihab has published a bilingual poetry collection, To Love a Palestinian Woman, in 2010, which, while the CBC produced his play Crossing Gibraltar in 2006. Ihab is deeply involved in social and community work, including campaigns against the sanctions and war in Iraq, opposing the blockade of Gaza, and advocating for indigenous rights. Before we begin, so we've titled the event today, The Groundwork for the Day After. And I want to start by thanking you all truly for being here. I personally flip-flopped, almost pulled out of the event, causing, I think, undue stress to Mr. Safdie here. Did not do a lot, but it wasn't good for his health, I think, at the time. But the reason was not that I was worried that I would get criticized for taking part in an event on Israel-Palestine, but really because I thought that a kind of petulant non-participation was maybe the appropriate response to, gestures wildly, to everything around us. The past few years have obviously been extremely challenging for anyone working on the Middle East. But after talking to Gabriel, I spent the last 10 years reporting on the war in Syria. My wife is from Aleppo, and she worked for the past decade as well on peace building in Syria. And she often used to introduce herself with a joke. I work in peace building in Syria, look how well it's going. And then December happened, a week before the fall of the Assad regime at the end of last year. Nobody could have imagined that things could change the way they could. She had resigned herself to not ever going back home to see her country and to visit her family. And everything changed in the course of a week. And so things can change, it takes an act of radical optimism to imagine a day after the horrific reality that we're enduring today. As the great Mahatma Gandhi said, you may never know what results come of your actions, but if you do nothing, there will be no result. And so here we are not doing nothing and trying to imagine a future that is better than today. So with that, enough out of me. I'm going to start by asking a question of Dani. So I've been absolutely enchanted by your film, Rule of Stone, which illustrates how design and aesthetics have been employed as tools of political strategy and cultural dominance. And central to the documentary is the mandated use of Jerusalem stone in construction. And I think you talked towards the end about how it symbolizes how beauty can mask underlying narratives of colonization and displacement. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this Rule of Stone, how it obscures the reality, the underlying history and stories of the city of Jerusalem, and if you could expand a little bit on what the Rule of Stone is.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so the Rule of Stone is a feature-length documentary that explores the place of design and architecture in colonizing our minds and colonizing the way we look at space. And I grew up in Jerusalem before immigrating to Canada 10 years ago. And I've always been fascinated by the role of architecture in space and how it impacts the way in which we identify with space and then ultimately fight for the space, fight for our rights in a space. And as I grew up in Jerusalem, I felt that somehow the occupation of the occupation really manifested itself in the way the city was expanding and growing and just becoming like this tremendous monster of stone. That is how I experienced it visually. And I remember walking around Jerusalem with my father, and he used to say that architecture is the most visceral expression of the human condition, of how we behave. And I used to see, around the neighborhoods, how people that were living in former Palestinian parts of the city, whether they were west side or east side, this whole east-west is again, also a colonial construct of how the city is divided. So you used to see how they used to build floors above and how they used to kind of just take over these places and these homes, and how they then imitated those places and homes and other settlements that were built after 1967, and kind of just created a continuity of space and shape. So I was very interested in making a film about architecture, telling the story of occupation and colonization through aesthetics and through beauty. And so that's what the film's about. It was really hard to make in a non-intellectual way, because I didn't want to just appeal to scholars and university students. I wanted to make a film that was communicable to, just a larger audience.
You talk a little bit about the irony of preserving a history that is kind of not the history of the state of Israel. The population that kind of that was displaced. That's the history that it's preserving and the culture that it's preserving, and it's kind of making it the new population's own, right? And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, because I was kind of, I listened to that segment of the documentary, and I thought to myself, there's maybe a silver lining here, that maybe if we preserve some aspects of the history, whether or not it belongs to the current people living in Jerusalem, or the current population living in Jerusalem, that maybe there is something positive there, because in the aftermath, one day maybe when things are resolved, post-conflict reality, that this character of the city is preserved in some way into the future. It was interesting because all the architects that you talked to seemed very uncomfortable with talking about their role in maybe changing the demographics of the city and all of that. But I was kind of seeing a little bit of the silver lining of it. I wonder what you think of that.
Well, it really comes down to actually how the narrative is told in relationship to space, and how we then talk about it, and whether that is acknowledged or not. So that in and of itself is not acknowledged, and archaeology and architecture is really in the hands today of truly messianic ideas that are spread throughout the whole country, and Jerusalem is the capital of it. So in a sense, you can look at Jerusalem and see this is the capital of the apartheid state of Israel. And its shape is really just an amalgamation of that idea. So I remember when I was working in Israel-Palestine in the early 90s when the Oslo Agreement was signed, and one of the great problems was this historical reconciliation as to what really happened in the land, and how we built our identities upon destroyed Arab villages, and that really the Nakba was at the core of this tragedy. Well, people then, you know, you can go further back, but in a sense, there was like, nobody talks about like the cores of where this comes from. So there's nothing wrong in preserving, but if you're preserving it, for example, before to just say, well, this is the reason why our ancestors used to live here, and this is an example of that, is one thing. If you're acknowledging the fact that, and when I mean Palestinians, I mean Jewish, Christian, and Muslims that used to live in the land before the creation of the State of Israel. It's not just Muslim or Christian. And if you're acknowledging the fact that the native people of that space, which were also Jewish, built these homes in a particular way, or are you basically displacing the origin of those people and saying this just belongs to a Jewish narrative? So there's a difference, and I think that by acknowledging the historical references is the basis of any kind of future understanding as to where this begins.
Yaakov, I have a question for you. So first I wanted to read this segment from your 2016 book, I think, What is Modern Israel? You said, the main threat to Zionism is European liberalism, which offers Jews an individual choice, but according to many Zionists, denies them the opportunity to live a true national life. Now, I want to contrast this with the last paragraph of a recent column that you wrote. The Israelis' war on Gaza confirms a triumph of nurture over nature, all the while demonstrating that technological progress does not equate to progress in humanity. In fact, it normalizes amorality, which most Western governments accept because, in their view, it is Jews who commit these atrocities, whether qualified as mass murder, ethnic cleansing, or genocide. Few realize that a century of living by the sword has transformed the Jew into a ruthless Israeli. Thus, one can better understand Israel as a state and a society when it is no longer regarded as the Jewish state, a nebulous concept that only blurs our vision and obscures reality. So, in the first segment, you're trying to say that there's an incompatibility almost between Zionism and European liberalism. But in your column, in your latest column, it sounds like European liberalism has sort of moved towards Zionism and towards adapting Zionism's ideals as its own, as we're sort of seeing in places like Germany, where there's criminalization of criticism of Israeli policies in the States as well, where people are being deported for taking part in student protests and things like that. So I was wondering if you have an update to your idea that Zionism and European liberalism are incompatible.
Well, thank you for your question. Indeed, I'm now working on a new book, and I came across a citation from Jabotinsky. He is the founder of a political movement which is today dominant in Israel, even though I believe that if he had resurrected, he wouldn't be accepted by the party he founded because he was way too liberal for today's Likud. But I think he was very honest in what he was saying. And here's an essay of 1910 that he wrote. It concerns today, if we read it, we can understand better Israel's behavior. And particularly, I'm reading this quote a week after Passover. It's, sometimes we base too many rosy hopes on the fallacy that a certain people has itself suffered and will therefore feel the agony of another people and understand it, and its conscience will not allow it to inflict on the weaker people what had been earlier inflicted on it. But in reality, it appears that these are mere pretty phrases. Only the Bible says, "You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger, seeing you were strangers in the land of Egypt." contemporary morality has no place for such childish humanism. I think it's very relevant because we are talking about a movement which in 1910 was not even started, that today has shaped generations of Israelis. And I think liberalism, European liberalism as it existed then, was indeed an anathema to Zionism, because when Zionism was started, most Jews were against it. Those who were against on sort of social grounds said, we're about to be accepted by this society, and you're telling us, like the anti-Semites, that we don't belong here, we have to go somewhere. So that's quite natural that Zionism was rejected, because there was a belief in liberalism and all that. And when Israel started as an independent state in 1948, it was a latecomer. And that's one of the problems, that a latecomer to the colonial settlement, because by that time colonial settlements were being dismantled and Israel was about to be started. But through the history, Israel has become a pioneer. And that's what refers to the second quote. Israel has become a pioneer in terms of unabashed discrimination, unabashed apartheid, and things that Israel was doing were unimaginable in Europe, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Actually, I think one journalist, Israeli journalist, wrote that had Le Pen père, would make it to become a politician in Israel, he would be somewhere on center-left. Because the whole spectrum at that time was already skewed towards what we call right. And I think that today Israel is behind the deliberalization of Western societies. It's not doing it out of ideological conviction, but it's doing it out of practical necessity, because justifying the unjustifiable is a difficult task. So there used to be arguments, there used to be debates. I remember, I'm old enough, that there were debates. You could debate convinced Zionists, and we had different opinions. There were panels. It's no longer, because first, dissident discourse was ignored, silenced, and now it's police and judicial measures are applied to dissident discourse. So, and at the same time, what I think was important for liberal societies is the rational debate, rational political debate. And it has been substituted with emotions and moral superiority.
Right. So and by the way, anyone feel free to jump in if you have like a comment.
May I jump back to Jerusalem?
Yeah, of course.
When I first visited Gaza, Gilo, an interesting lapsus. Yeah, but when I saw the architecture of Gilo, I said, oh, but that's built against tanks.
Yeah.
It's impossible to pass there with a tank. I think there was a tremendously military aspect to new Israeli architecture, but that was my uninformed opinion.
I wonder if you could talk about, I mean, as someone who came here from the Soviet Union, you know, as you see this, this decline in the values espoused by Western liberalism as we knew it when we first, I mean, I'm an immigrant too, and I came here, you know, I came here from Egypt and from Lebanon, Syria, and there's an ideal, right? There's an ideal about this society that you're coming to, and it's very disheartening to sort of witness, as you said, trying to justify the unjustifiable as a ruling elite and as a ruling class in this society. And I wonder how you deal with it, how you deal with this sense that these ideals that you believed in when you first came here are sort of on the decline. And is the solution to it, non-participation? Is the solution to it trying to change it from within? How do you fix things?
Well, non-participation is not an option for me for two reasons. I value enormously the conditions in which I've worked at the university, which gives me ample time to think and makes it possible for me not to repeat what I read in newspapers. And I think it's important to give back to society that society provided me with. And the second, your quote from Gandhi, I get inspired by a Talmudic quote, if I may. The work is ample, and you may not see the results, but you cannot desist from it. And I think that on the topic we're discussing, there's ample reason to abandon everything and to abandon hope and stop talking about it. I think that I still believe that there are a lot of rational people around, there are a lot of moral people. And just explaining that to one person, for me, is enough of a justification of the effort that I put in. But I do encourage rational debate, because today, you mentioned that when I arrived here from the Soviet Union, I was in search of freedom. And indeed, there was freedom. Now I am discovering very troubling reminiscences of the Soviet side of civilization here. Criticism in the Soviet Union could be dismissed as, oh, that's imperialist discourse. Do you recognize the same way that if you say something, oh, you're a Hamas supporter, and you are a stooge for Putin. You don't discuss issues. In other words, I discredit you personally. And I think this is a betrayal that we here on this panel and people in the audience and others can do something to turn around. But it's not being developed in a vacuum. There are much stronger forces that create the context which is propitious for that, and I can talk about it later. I don't want to belabor it too much.
I mean, I asked you the question because I want to help myself wake up every morning. And I think talking about why it still matters to continue to participate is a really important thing, because I think that's also key for why we're here in the first place. Because it's so much easier to just retreat into a cocoon of just I don't want to be a part of anything. So I'm grateful to you for elucidating that. Mustafa, I want to go to you now. I want to read a quote from your book. I think it was how does it feel to be a problem? It seems barely an exaggeration to say that Arab and Muslim Americans are constantly talked about but almost never heard from. The problem is not that they lack representations, but that they have too many. And these are all abstractions. They are floating everywhere in the virtual landscape of the national imagination as either villains of Islam or victims of Arab culture. Yet, as in the postmodern world in which we live, sometimes when you're everywhere, you are really nowhere. I wanted to ask you about this in the context of Gaza. It seems that every conflict that kind of pops up in the world, whether it was Syria, Yemen, now Gaza, Ukraine, we always talk about how these are the most well-documented conflicts in history, right? There's so much material out there. And especially with Gaza, we're constantly seeing the images and the videos and the destruction and the suffering. How has what you said about Arab Americans sort of being everywhere and nowhere all at once, hyper-visible and invisible, how has that translated into the Palestinians and the conflict in Gaza specifically?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and talking to you all. My short answer to the question is that I think the nature of power is to make things appear and to make things disappear. I think we could consider that a kind of definition of power itself. And I think we're seeing that played out. We saw it played out in 9/11, for example, in the United States. Just as a brief aside, I'm actually from Kingston, Ontario, by the way. But I went to...
Won't hold it against you, but...
Yeah, I know. This is Montreal. Then I moved to the United States for graduate school and have stayed there since. So I have my foot in both places, I guess you could say. So I think I'm familiar with, the Middle East, as it's called, with the United States political landscape and with the landscape here also in Canada. And I've seen them change over the years. And I've seen, for example, how in the United States, immediately following 9/11, there was a massive exertion of repression that particularly attached itself to the bodies of Muslims and Arabs within the country. And much of that was engaged in sort of large-scale sweep arrests, for example. In other words, the ability to make people in themselves disappear, right? It's the nature of power to make things appear, to make things disappear. And the way that we see that being articulated today is very much, I think, we can see that on the streets of New York City, on the streets of, on the campuses across the country. We see different people being disappeared for basically only the expression of certain ideas that the government finds inconvenient. So the idea that there can only be a singularity of narrative, something that I think Yaakov was also talking very much about, is damaging not just to American society, but really to the idea of an open society itself. And that's really what's at stake here. So one of the things that I think is really, really, really important is to make sure that we understand that the war in Gaza is having what Hannah Arendt, what Aimé Césaire would have called boomerang effects, right? They're coming back. The repression that is needed to prosecute a war abroad will come back and boomerang back into the same society in which you are living. And I think we're seeing that take place right now within the United States in a way that happened with the Biden administration already, which began the crackdown on speech, and in a way that's continuing with the Trump administration. And so, what's interesting about it is the opposition that it also is garnering at the same time. So while the amount of repression that I think that we're seeing throughout, in fact, the Western world is unparalleled, we're also seeing the support for the idea of Palestine more than we've ever seen it before, right? Because the idea of Palestine no longer means only that the people of Palestine have the right to determine their own fate. But right now, the idea of Palestine has now become the idea of our own liberation.
Well, do you think that, with the amount of detail and just in terms of what's happening on the ground, it feels like there's an even greater gap between, like you were saying, that there's this, almost a critical mass of support for the idea of Palestine. But at the same time, you see this huge gap between like the official response to it, right? This just desire to completely ignore the suffering of the Palestinians. And it seems to kind of be inversely proportional to how much we know of what's happening to the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Why is there such a huge gap between the public perception of what's going on and the official response to what's going on? It feels like there should be almost like that it's politically convenient more to acknowledge the suffering of the Palestinians as time goes on.
Well, I do think that it is also connected to the rise of a kind of authoritarian thinking within the Western democracies that we find today. That the challenge that Palestine brings challenges American hegemony in the region. I think it's also very important that we understand that the war in Gaza is not Israel's war only. This is an American war that's also being prosecuted in Gaza as we speak. You know, the American agenda for reshaping the Middle East for its own purposes is very much at play in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran, throughout the whole region. So that agenda is one that as in this articulation of it, is requiring complete obeisance from a population. And part of it, of course, is social media. We have an ability to message outside of the mainstream that we didn't have before. And that has meant also the contested terrain of where ideas float is in social media, and the idea of being able to restrict what people can think about is very much at play within social media circles today as well. So I think it's a combination of where we are at, both politically, both socially, both technologically. It's all of these things all together. And the tragedy of it all is that it is still occurring on the deaths, the massive industrial scale deaths of people in Gaza right now, and that we should not forget.
I want to come back later to this idea of how does it feel to be a problem, because I'm very glad that it's not just Arab students anymore. Finally, it's expanded to a large segment of the population. But before we get to that, Ihab, I wonder if you could read to us from one of your poems. It's a poem called "The Invasion of Gaza," which, believe it or not, you wrote in 2009. But I mean, I'd like for you to read it first before maybe talking about how things are different now from when you wrote it, or how little they've changed. So.
You know, it is so interesting and difficult after being on a panel with such interesting and insightful speakers and a very talented moderator that by the time your turn comes, you want to say things totally different than what you had come to say. But I'll try to play nice and I'll try to follow but I will interject with my thoughts. I hope I get the chance for that. So yes, this poem is in the voice of a Gazan man. It's written in Arabic, so I'll read a piece of the Arabic, then I'll go to the English. بكتب لك من جوه حصار، بكتب لك من تحت جدار كان يوم شايل سقف الدار، بكتب لك من أرض الحبلة بالأحرار باسمي وباسم الشهداء والثوار، بكتب لك وفي حلقي مرار. So in my best ability to translate it, I hate translating my poetry, by the way, but besieged, I write. Lying under a fallen concrete slab, I write. From this persistent land, I write. For me, for the fighters, for the martyrs, for the victims, I write. Bitter, I write. The war in Gaza pierced my heart with a poisoned spear. Planes and bombs, unarmed people, a world blinded by fear. I call on you, but you're confused. But you're confused, clueless, manipulated, used. For you too, they have a plan. But you can't see. Your time is near. The war on Gaza will shame you to the end of days. But you can't move, you can't think. Sometimes you can't even shed a tear. Okay, I'll stop here. This was written during another war on Gaza that was very mild compared to the genocide we are seeing now. In 2008, 2009, over the new year, that war was launched, and yes, I was one of the people who joined after that the Global March to Gaza and worked on the flotillas, and we thought that things cannot go much worse and things will get better. Yet, and that's where it comes to what I heard from my esteemed co-panelists here, we were also dreaming that if this, I was in a lecture by Simon Sebag Montefiore just half an hour ago, and he said that a Palestinian intellectual, I think it was Khalid, he came to Arafat and told him, why are you focusing on pleasing the Arab leaders? Why don't you focus on just having the students around the world stand up for your just cause? And he said that Arafat just said, yeah, ignored this and continued in his merry way. But now it's happened. Now it has happened without Arafat trying or anybody trying to make it happen. But it seems that it's not about how much we know, because wars, atrocities against civilians have been going on for the last 20 years, and more they're on our media, and now they're directly on our phones 24 hours a day. But it seems that doesn't matter at all. It seems that what matters really is what's happening in the halls of power around the world. And it seems that in these halls of power, there has memory of what happened, for example, during World War II, including the Holocaust, have been forgotten, because they didn't live them. And they say that we can recreate the grab of power, the control of people without paying the price. It seems that that's the dominant mentality that is controlling most of the rulers of today's world, and especially those who are populist and have this right-leaning mentalities. So what do we do? Of course, yes, 100% Yaakov, 100% Daneh, 100% Mustafa, we continue to try to work. But I think we need to change our modus operandi to take this into consideration, because it seems that the voice of the people, as long as it's confined to the streets, does not affect those Machiavellian ideology leaders that are controlling our world today. And more they are in control.
Yaakov, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that support for Israel has suffered for a long time from a democratic deficit. That's what you were talking about, that the ruling class supports and the population objects to it more or less. Even in the United States, 53% today consider Israel in a negative light. And definitely in Europe, it's much higher. But it makes no difference. And again, I would say that Israel here is a startup nation. Startup in the sense that it shows that it's possible to attain very complicated and very morally objectionable goals by ignoring public opinion. And this is something which wasn't practiced too much here in Western societies. There was a certain degree of shame, there was a certain degree of appropriateness. Now the masks are off. And Israel helps. Israel is one of the first to do it. And even before the genocide in Gaza. And I think here is the larger context that's more important. That we live in Western societies who undergo crises, in plural. What is the normal, traditional way of coping with a crisis? Suppress freedoms, militarize, and ignore democratic rights. So that's exactly what we've been observing. You know, in the current electoral campaign that comes to an end tomorrow, there was discussion whether 88 fighter jets should be bought in Canada from Lockheed or from Saab in Sweden. I didn't see any rational debate against whom exactly those 88 fighter jets are needed, because the only country that threatens Canada, I don't think they intend to use them against the United States. So, but there's no rational debate. And when you raise this question, you'll look like half crazy, because you go out of the established discourse. So we have to understand that the ruling class has to suppress freedoms one way or another. And the times when things worked well and there was a certain freedom and there was a certain social justice, because one of the reasons I'm talking about the crisis, and here in that part of Montreal you could see it graphically, poverty, homelessness, and at the same time, 88 fighter jets that Canada so much needs. And in order to make people forget this, you need an enemy. So it was the Muslim, the Arab, Putin. There will be another, no doubt. Yeah. And unfortunately, perhaps because of the social media, perhaps because we are all too well informed, population is a lot less active than it used to be, except the students.
Well, in the United States, there are demonstrations actually all the time. All the time, every day, pretty much. In New York City, there's a demonstration. Every week, there's a major demonstration. Demonstrations have never been more important and more inconsequential, right? As of now, yeah. And I think that's really key, because we talk about the ways in which societies are run and how they should be run, and it's not, obviously we see all kinds of problems even with electoral politics. We then think, okay, well, we move to the street, but the street is managed so much that the street is inconsequential at this point, and we're seeing it reach an apogee moment right now. But I think it began at least as far back as 2003, when we saw massive demonstrations around the globe to prevent the war in Iraq from happening, and the U.S. just went ahead and did it anyway, right? And so we need another kind of political imagination that can think beyond the things that we've had in the past.
Go ahead.
Two things. In 2003, they managed to stop some countries from joining the coalition of the willing. But you mentioned at the beginning of your statement, they have never been as important, and also they've never been so insequential. How do you match the two?
They've never been.
Why are they important?
They're important because they actually develop community. They develop an important moment of coherence of a group of people coming together for a cause. But the nature of power is so absolute at this moment that they can ignore it.
But don't they help the echo chamber and prevent from seeking other ways to achieve results?
So actually, I want to jump in in response to that. One of the things that, again, I go back to Syria, but the conflict there went on for 14 years, right? 14 years where it was completely hopeless, right? But during those 14 years, one of the most fascinating things that was ongoing, even as there were chemical attacks, as there was destruction, the rule of law was completely flouted, 700 hospital bombings. There was a grassroots movement, right, that was coalescing, that was forming a kind of civil society within Syria that frankly is unparalleled in the rest of the region, save perhaps for Lebanon. And that's because Lebanon had its own sort of special status where there was a bit more freedom to pursue those sorts of things. But we're seeing the consequences of that civil society emerge right now, as we're starting to talk about a transition in Syria, as we're starting to talk about a new constitution, as we're starting to talk about the shape of the post-Assad government. The existence of this grassroots movement is shaping the post-war society in a way that may well end up being like inconsequential, but actually gives Syria a chance to emerge from this as a real democracy, as a real society, as a real cohesive entity, in a way that Egypt was not able to do, in a way that Yemen was not able to do, in a way that many of the post-Arab Spring Middle Eastern societies did not get a chance to be. And so this is not to say that what's happening right now is going to be consequential in the long term. We don't know, but I think that the grassroots civil society, this evolution is something that's very important for post-conflict societies for whenever this ends.
Or even,
I just want to say that I don't want to get too deep into Syria because every
No,
situation
and I
is
don't want to get
different.
too deep into Syria. It's just an example.
But the extension, I mean, so many Syrians say that 2011 in Syria has no relationship to 2024 December in Syria. So that's another story altogether. But yeah, I'd like
Mustafa,
to...
go ahead.
Yeah.
well, all I will say is that I think in many ways, the first Intifada was like that too. The first Intifada really developed a lot of civil society organizations within the West Bank and among Palestinians. In a similar fashion, corollary, the encampments. I don't know how many people spent any time in the encampments. Those were mutual aid societies for those students, actually. And that was true in the United States, as it was in Canada. I actually went to the one in Queen's University. Sorry, I bring up Kingston again. But the encampments were really lovely environments, despite everything that you hear in the mainstream and by the powers that be, that those are just all lies. The encampments were also mutual aid societies that thought that they were taking education, they were taking the reins of their own education. They were teaching themselves about the history of the region, about the history of Palestinians and Israelis, about the history of Dabki, of Judaism and Islam and Christianity. Like, they were actually really warm and wonderful and inviting places. And that's actually, I believe, one of the reasons why they were so threatening.
Right. Danny, I want to go back to you. I really highly recommend you see your film, Rule of Stone. It's truly enchanting. Truly an enchanting production. I wanted to ask you about, your film. There were calls to boycott it from some organizations. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and about the challenges of, producing something that speaks to the reality on the ground at a time where nobody seems to agree on what the truth is, where, and just the challenges of being a journalist and a documentary filmmaker at a time like this.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know where to begin, really, because I'm listening to all of you. And I think that from the entertainment, like the way I experience it in the film world, which I think has a great deal to do with how people are reacting to content, and there's just so much, and also there's a certain kind of dumbification of society. I think that is deliberate, which all the major corporations are part of, whether it's Apple, Netflix. I mean, you cannot, I don't know who has a subscription to Netflix. I can't watch anything on it. And then I ask myself, well, how is this possible when I travel to film festivals and there's some really, truly important work being produced by incredible people that cannot be seen. It does not reach the mainstream. And so you have to start questioning, also how we are being exposed to certain content when on the phones we just see images and images and images and images, but nobody anymore is processing, curating what it is that we can have a conversation about, which used to be the case, let's say, I don't know, even 10 years ago in a film festival. You had confidence in the public broadcaster. The public broadcaster would really think through certain ideas, for better or for worse, but there were people that were trying. So with the disarmament of all this, because there's no more public television that is supported, there's no more money for film, it is so difficult to produce. And then to show your film to an audience. And my film is a prime example of it. I cannot show my film in Canada because everybody is afraid who will be offended by my film if they see it, whether it's Palestinians or Jews, or the encampments, so there's been such a polarization of the way in which we consume media that we're just, sticking labels to things. Oh, well, they're a Zionist. Oh, they're this, they're that. And they don't know what they're talking about. They have no historical reference, deep historical reference. So the reality becomes really, really contentious. And I have experienced this profoundly. On one hand, I really understand the non-violent boycott movement against Israel, and I support it fully. On the other hand, I feel that it is also used within certain groups to kind of eliminate the voices of certain very critical voices that I think are really important. So that has pained me tremendously, because even though I have not woken up to the Palestinian fight for freedom on October 7th. I have done this my whole life. And so in a way, like, I feel that a lot of people in our, like me, okay, people that I grew up in Israel, I left Israel, I now live here, I have a certain point of view. We've been in total solidarity with the Palestinian movement for liberation. Today we find ourselves completely orphans because we're being attacked from all sides. We're being attacked by the radical left, by the kids of the encampments that, will look at any kind of discussion with me as a form of normalization. That is not normal. That has to come also from all sides. You asked me the day after, like, we all have to sit at the table and talk to one another and have a conversation, because all of, the whole mechanism is trying to make it so that we will not have that conversation.
Yeah, it's totally insane. With the boycott against No Other Land and things like that.
I just want to jump in, Danny, to tell you that that's not only you, and it's not only because of using the boycott for that against somebody like you, but there is also a disconnect that I feel between generations of pro-Palestinian activists,
right.
And there is a lot of rejection to you, including me, for example, who failed to achieve anything. Let us achieve what we can in our own way. And I heard that in the encampment in McGill. I heard that in the encampment in the University of Stockholm.
Yeah.
So it's not only limited to any geographical.
I agree, and I heard that 25 years ago when Oslo was signed. And now we are, how many years later? We're in the same position, grooming a whole new generation that we all support. Yeah. But where is this taking us? It's not taking us to a place where we, I kind of see 30 years from now, people talking about the people in the encampments in the same way that they talked about us 25 years. It's this kind of cycle that is terrifying. It saddens me.
I'm curious. The artistic choice to kind of take a step back from the day-to-day, all the violence that's happening, all the intensity of being on social media, and to sit and kind of do a work that is interested in kind of taking a step back and just looking at the society through the lens of the Jerusalem stone is a fascinating thing to me. We've been working on long form for the past 4 years, and I'm always shocked at the fact that people sit and actually read. Because what we've been told is that people are too, we have the attention span of a gnat now. We don't sit and watch anything that's longer than a 6-second video on TikTok or Facebook. And that dates me, Facebook. Nobody's on Facebook anymore. But
I am.
But
they're coming back to it, by the way.
Oh, you are?
No.
It's fascinating because I think people actually want to withdraw from the persistent, constant outrage of being on social media, and they actually want to almost consume media in the same way that they used to consume the newspaper. They sit and read, a curated newsletter in the morning and learn something new about the world and think about it over the course of the day and then move on with their day. They don't want to sit there and sort of absorb everything that's happening because it truly is, corrosive to your mind. And I wonder, how does it feel for someone to, you're sitting there and you're absorbing all the news that's going on in Gaza and in Israel and Palestine, and you take a step back and you try and contemplate, that artistic choice. How do you feel it fits into the way we consume media now? Like, are you able to get people to sit and just sit back and be like, okay, I'm just gonna talk about Jerusalem Stone for an hour and a half? You know?
I think it's hard to. I've produced recently another film on Polish complicity in the Holocaust, and I think people just generally have a hard time watching something that is not about the now. So, like, the films that are now shown in film festivals are kind of gratifying, pleasing for the moment, in the sense that the act of watching it makes you feel like and it's an illusion because it's not really the case. I mean, when you watch a film that is an activist film, you feel kind of that gratification that you are participating in resistance. As a filmmaker, they make you write grants, basically, and you're supposed to, like, tell them how is this going to contribute. And it's kind of like a game in a way, because I don't really think that it does make a difference in the end. So we're all participating in that. I've recently disconnected from social media completely, and I've decided that's it. Like, I don't want to hear about it. And the only thing that I feel I can do for the rest of the time that I'm allowed to make films is to try and be as true to myself and tell a story and look for the truth from what I understand now. That's the only thing I can do, and hope that it will have an audience, and try and work that way. And just to be blind to the noise, because there is so much noise around us right now that we don't even see the essence of what we should really be striving for.
Jakob, you wanted to jump in?
Here's just a few things that I think we can do. We people who use at least words, not images, because some of the words have disappeared. You may notice that I use the phrase ruling class. It's no longer used, it's elite. And elite in my vocabulary is something totally different. You know, Rostropovich was an elite cello player. That's something else. Ruling class is qualitatively different. And there are many other things. Even at this panel, we talked about war in Gaza. War, in my understanding, is between more or less comparable entities. What is going on in Gaza is anything but war. It can be genocide, mass murder, pacification of the natives, whatever, colonial war, but it's colonial, war, like the British used to call in Kenya, pacification of the natives. And I think just by using the word war, we project a totally wrong image, that there are two parties and they're fighting a war and something is happening, or Palestinian-Israeli conflict, again. And what brought me to this awareness, when I was in Japan, and one of my books was being promoted there, and at that time there were some kind of negotiations between Israel and the PLO started. And on Japanese television, they asked me, what do you expect from these negotiations? I say, if you see a sumo wrestler and a 3-year-old, what can you expect from that? And I think this disproportion is something that we have to emphasize all the time. Some people may feel offended because of that, but that's the reality. Another thing I want to say is a totally different nature. One of the reasons that the phrase ruling class disappeared and many other words disappeared is that the left has disappeared. Left has degenerated into identity politics, and I would say sinned the first in terms of cancel culture. It's their original sin. Now they're paying for it. So that discourse makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to hear it. That word, N-word, makes me uneasy. There's a straight road to what we are experiencing today. Kefir, I feel uncomfortable.
There's a Hamas sympathizing Kefir right here.
It's aggression against me. That's what's being said.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that this is happening because rational argument has been substituted with emotion and manipulated emotions. So I think that the disappearance of of the left is partly the cause that the demonstrations are inconsequential, that many protest movements unrelated to Western Asia, even that is in Western Asia, not Middle East. You see, it makes a lot of difference.
Yeah.
So I think that there are many other things that have disappeared, and we who deal with words can resurrect them and can start using. I try to use them, and I think that may clarify things for people. But there's a lot of educational work to be done in general, not only about Israel, Palestine, and so on. You know, Warren Buffett, the billionaire, once said that there is a class war going on and we are winning it. So he doesn't shy away from the term class war.
What other words do you guys think we should bring back that describe the current moment but we haven't used in quite some time?
The concentration of capital, for example. No, there's a whole vocabulary that is there, which has been suppressed because you see, the poverty and everything else we see in the crisis in society is a result of the disappearance of the left.
Yeah.
And the way out that we are seeing now is more or less fascism.
Yeah.
Milder form, not Nazism, but milder form of fascism, less mild. You know, it's unbelievable that Germany, which really prides itself on being this kind of democratic supremacy, forbade a former Greek minister to appear even on Zoom in a pro-Palestinian event.
Yeah.
Now they're going to celebrate 80th anniversary of the victory in Europe, and they forbade Soviet flags. Look, there is something going on there that, and I'm just taking Germany as an example, but there are many others that you can find.
Yeah.
And on top of everything that, Europe and Canada as well prides itself as being the light unto the nations, that we are carrying democracy. And to me, it appears very similar to the mission civilisatrice of the old times. They don't use the cross, they use something else, but I don't see much of a difference.
I'm very conscious of the time, and I could talk to you guys forever.
Can I add
but
one little thing?
yeah.
I just want to add something about boycotting and in general. Like, I want to say something. I experienced something very strong with this whole idea of a tremendous amount of resistance coming from kind of just classifying you as where you're from. But there's also a lesson to be learned from it as a creator. And I was in Amsterdam premiering my film, which was in and of itself wonderful. And at the same time, feeling so threatened by the fact that I was being targeted at the same time. And I really tried to understand that. I really tried to understand how is this affecting me, and where do I dismantle my ego and try to really see this in a way that I didn't see it before. And why is it happening? And how could I see it? And how could I learn from it? Because there were like all these other, like there were 2 or 3 other Israelis walking around Amsterdam that day, and like in those days. And there was this kind of, they were so, I don't even know how to express it in words, but there was a kind of humility about them that I hadn't seen before in the film business, where you would have this kind of whitewashing of the occupation through film, through representation, and you could still feel comfortable in your society and at the same time represent its evils. And for the first time, I actually saw how that was being dismantled. And I thought, maybe they can take something back and feel and rethink the way in which they portray, because even if it means 2 or 3 people now learning something from it, it produces a new form of expression. And I thought that there was something really strong to learn from that, even though it affected me. And I think that that is something that we as artists need to learn how to do, is we need to kind of understand how to recreate and understand and reshape our ways of seeing ourselves within that mechanism.
Love that. I mean, before I open it up to the audience, I'd like to ask Mustafa and Ihab a question. We have an election tomorrow in Canada, and one of the things that the Conservative candidate said was that we don't want these wars that are happening, halfway across the world. We don't want to bring them back to Canada, right? And I don't have an opinion necessarily on it. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I'm curious how you interpret that, like this idea that there are these conflicts that are very far away that we maybe ought to care about, but kind of, in our hearts, and not necessarily try to create movements around or try to create any global solidarity around. I'm curious how you interpret that statement and whether you agree with it or not. Mustafa, why don't you start?
Well, I think that's a, can I say stupid statement? George W. Bush said during the Iraq War, we're fighting them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. It's just like, no, it was a colonial conquest that you were after. It was not anything else. And in regards to the Canadian election, I mean, it's not that Canada is somehow, hermetically sealed off from the rest of the world. In fact, Canada is part of the Western consensus that creates that enables the state of Israel to continue with its genocidal campaign that's going on in Gaza right now. So, and it's not going to be only in that situation either. Canada is a member of the world, and that means participating in the world and taking responsibility for the ways in which you participate in the world. And to say that we don't want the world to come here is irresponsible for taking responsibility for one's own actions, if you ask me.
There's a saying in Arabic, كلمة حق يراد بها باطل.
Right.
A righteous word that is intended to bring falsehood. The idea here, and it brings me back to Dane's work about the Jerusalem stone, there can be a good idea that we want Jerusalem to look beautiful, and then use that to impose a certain urban system that discriminates against some people. Same thing back to Israel, the unrecognized villages of the Bedouins. Same idea. We want them to live in a respectable, well-planned villages, but the end is we make them live nowhere at all. And the same thing about the conservatives here. There can be a positive thing about trying to maintain social peace and limit the kind, at least, of interaction between people who are emotionally or ideologically related to certain struggles. But on the other hand, to use this to stifle freedom of expression, that is the foundation of anything good that we are living in the West or in Canada or whatever, and to use that selectively to silence this group but allow this group under different pretenses is a ridiculous thing to even consider when it comes from somebody like Pierre Poilievre or Donald Trump or people or groups or entities that their end goal is already quite clear to most of us.
I've often encouraged friends who are kind of subscribing increasingly to the authoritarian vision of the world to go and live in Egypt for a few years, and try to say what they think, or go to Assad Syria,
or in current day Syria.
Well, yeah, I mean it's going to be challenging, but I mean nobody's ever taken me up on it. So anyway, we have.
I wanted just to get to what not bringing war here. I think we don't need to bring it here in the sense that we don't need street fights. But Canada has supplied arms to Israel. The United States, well, without U.S. arms, much of the genocide wouldn't have been possible. Germany supplies a lot of arms to Israel. A lot of countries vote in support of Israel. So I think that Canada and other countries participate actively. But there is another aspect, and that's a much touchier issue. For those here who stand by Israel and proudly display Israeli flags in front of old age homes and other Jewish community institutions, I think they've abdicated all responsibility for what they're doing. They think that it's free of charge to support and stand by and praise and say we are proud, and not to pay any price for that. I think there's something wrong about that. I think Peter Beinart in his book, I think, said that there is a responsibility for solidarity. And I know it's a touchy subject, and I'm not talking about violence, but if we see someone who proudly supports genocidal actions, do we have to necessarily accept that discourse as legitimate? I'm not talking about cancel culture, no. I think I'm all for debate. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen. But again, solidarity has to be coupled with responsibility, and I don't see it at all.
All right, well, we have about 15 minutes, I think, 10 minutes, and we'd like to involve you guys in the discussion so it's not, an echo chamber up here. So why don't we open up the floor for questions from the audience? I think we've got a question over here. Is there a mic or something? Yeah, we can, okay. So can we have it up here? Thanks. If you could introduce yourself and say the question. We don't do comments only, so if you could ask a question, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Adam. I ask myself all the time, what is the role of a Jew? And I think of a word, doigkeit, which in Yiddish means here-ness. And I think of the Chernovitz conference in the 1890s, where it was being decided what language will be spoken in the land of Zion. And I think of, with shame, of the Yiddish New York Festival, where people had to use emoticons in their chats to signal other pro-Palestinian supporters because there was a tacit boycott. But Yiddishkeit as a movement had great vitality. And if you think of where Rothschild was wanting to situate Jews, it was Argentina. He wanted a homeland for Jews in Argentina, and other people had come up with this. And so the question I ask myself, and I'd like to ask it of you all, what's so important about Israel? We have created a rich culture. We Jews in the diaspora have created a rich, vital culture with doigkeit, here-ness. There's nothing that should prevent a movement of doigkeit. And so I wonder, it's a pipe dream perhaps, but I wonder if the discourse can shift to instead a discourse of Jewish pride in being where you come from, which is not the land of Eretz Israel, but the land of Russia, of the Soviet Union, of Belarus, where my family came from.
Danny, Yakov, do you guys want to say something?
Go ahead.
I absolutely, feel for what you're saying. For me, it's really complicated because I don't see myself. I was born in Israel. My son was born in Jerusalem. He defines himself as a Palestinian. I would love to see myself as a Palestinian, but I am Israel. I'm born there. That's why it is important there, not because it's the state of Israel in that sense. But now I'm trying to disengage from that, and I recognize that it's also. I never had a connection to Judaism in that sense. I was born to that reality, so it's very. I'm truly trying to understand what that means going forward, and I think it's I don't think you can. Unfortunately, the state of Israel has had such a grotesque and profound impact on the lives of Jews everywhere that it's not. You can't de-responsibilize the whole mechanism that created this new form of identity. And I wish it was that simple, in a sense.
Well, I think it is simple.
Yeah.
I think it is.
No, I agree that it's simple. It's just that,
Yeah, one way to do it is to decouple Israel from the Jews. In other words, we have to respect the intentions of the founders of Zionism, the intentions of the state of those who started the state. They wanted to create a new Hebrew, not a Jew, no. They wanted to create a new culture, and they wanted to get rid of religion, of all these, definitely of Yiddish, and they succeeded. And many generations, maybe including you, grew up with very little knowledge of Jewish history or Jewish religion, or it was all fashioned in a way that history leads to the creation of the state of Israel. And I think that today, particularly young Jews in North America, but in Europe to a lesser extent, develop their culture, their interests, regardless of existence of Israel or non-existence of Israel. And I think that's another way of undermining the colonial settlement in Palestine is by saying, well, these people wanted to do this. They created their own culture. They created their own state. But it has very little to do because they wanted to negate Jewish culture. They wanted to negate Jewish religion. And they did that, and they did it very successfully. There's no place in the world where you can be de-Judaized more successfully than in Israel. So this has to be known. And second point, very short point, there are many times more Christian Zionists than Jewish population in the world. Pastor Hagee, whom I don't quote too often, said that there are 50 million Christian Zionists in his group, Christians United for Israel. For your information, there are about 15 million Jews in the world, including babies and old people. So we're talking about incommensurable things. And this has to be emphasized, to answer your question, that it's not a Jewish thing.
I'm fascinated by this because there's a parallel in the Middle East right now, another state that's kind of de-religionizing, Saudi Arabia, which is, I grew up, being influenced greatly by the Saudi version of Islam and all of that, and a lot of my compatriots, especially Egyptians, Syrians, Lebanese, who went to work in the Gulf, and were influenced by that very conservative fundamentalist strain. And right now, Saudi Arabia is kind of, they sort of completely neutered the power of the religious establishment. And the foundation of the state is sort of slowly being made into a Saudi nationalism that is completely decoupled from Islam as a faith. Like Islam is an inspiration for the rules, for the laws, for the culture of the country, but they're very deliberately trying to implement a nationalistic vision of the society. And I think it's a good thing. It's a, and people don't talk about it in a negative sense. And it's very curious to me, these parallels between the two societies, between Saudi and Israeli society, and I don't think that gets talked about very often.
True, but I think, first of all, that's mostly a top-down project in Saudi. And it hasn't necessarily translated into more political rights either.
Give it time. No, not political rights, but yeah, for sure.
So there are questions regarding that, I think. And just as a quick aside, I'm sure people are familiar, but your question, sir, reminds me very much of the work of Isaac Deutscher. Isaac Deutscher, the writer who in the 50s, as early as the late 50s and into the 60s, was writing about the loss of Yiddish, visiting Israel and writing these long essays about Israel and seeing and lamenting about how Israeli society has meant the loss of a kind of diaspora sensibility, which he saw as being very much connected to the Yiddish language and to his own existence. And so I thought that was, if people are interested, Isaac Deutscher's work is really great.
All right, let's take another question. Go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, yes, sir, Mike, yeah. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, we'll go there and then we'll come to you for the we'll come to you for the last one.
I like the idea of let's get back and talk about the ruling class. Oh, sorry, Sarah. And also the fact that there's words that we should stop using, like hate, hateful about demonstrations.
Could you speak closer to the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so in terms of words that we've dropped using ruling class needs to come back, and words that keep getting repeated that should not be repeated the way they are, that every time there's a demonstration, it's hateful and it's hateful and hateful. Could you just talk a little bit about why Canadian universities or McGill, Concordia are so terrible about Gaza? I understand Christian Zionists in the States, but we don't really have that here. And I never thought that we had an APAC equivalent here. So why is McGill, from day one, has just been so cruel, I think, to their students who were suffering and seeing their families killed? And I don't know, McGill, why are they so terrible, and what can we do about it, I guess?
I think I can speak to that since I'm from inside McGill. You're saying we have no equivalent of APAC. We don't. We don't. Not exactly the same, but there is a lot of connection between different powers that support Israel. Some of them Jewish, and some of them might not be, with the higher administrations of a university like McGill. And from day one, the imbalance of the statements that came out of the McGill administration before anything became public were totally unbalanced. And some of us, many of us from the inside, asked the administration to be balanced, just be balanced. Acknowledge the suffering of the two groups in the same way. They would not, they would turn a blind ear to any such advice, and they continued to antagonize the students that are supporting Palestinian rights and push them further and further and further. And at the end of the day, they had their way set. Let's remember that the courts and the city of Montreal refused to dismantle the encampment, and the administration turned the campus into a military zone, literally for 2 weeks. And any of those who saw the forces that dismantled the encampment, they were not security forces, they were more like paramilitary forces. So why I think the reason is, to me, is very clear. It is the influence of certain groups that hold Israel dear in one way or the other over the administration of the university.
And I think that till recently, English-speaking universities were more influenced by these groups. But now, and I work in a French language university, so in spite of my books and articles, I never was particularly molested for what I was writing. I don't think it would have been the case at McGill.
I have to say that I've been at McGill for 25 years. My public positions are very known. I have not faced or felt like internal pushback against that, except indirectly sometimes, but nothing serious. Yet I want to also add one thing to understand
But you don't teach.
But I don't teach.
That's the difference.
That's even more, Yaakov. That's even more because I'm not protected by academic freedom, you know. But another thing also is that McGill, I don't know if it's only McGill or there are others, but it's one Quebec university that's under a federal royal charter, and it does not have appointees to its board by the Quebec government, for example, which is very different than French universities, and maybe Concordia as well. I'm not sure, so I'm not saying it strongly. So that is also another difference for McGill in particular.
Okay, well,
Yeah, but I just wanted to finish that the French language milieu here was relatively freer about Palestinian solidarity. It's coming to an end because the Minister of Education used to work for Zionist lobby here. Now she's a Minister of Education, and she decided to interfere into the content of academic courses. I, among others, signed a petition for her resignation because that goes against every rule. But the Zionist lobby is extremely professional. They have a strategic vision of what they're doing. And we have to respect the powers that we face.
understood. Before we go, I'd like to give Gabriel an opportunity to say something.
I have lots to say, but
Yes.
Yeah.
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 good. Because there's so many points have been made, so many. Yeah, thank you.
Gesticulate with one hand, not
I
two.
want to. I'm Italian. I want to thank you first of all, Karim and Ahab, and Mustafa and Yaakov and Danai, for participating in this I think very important discussion, because I think this discussion is one that is needed, and that's why I wanted to have this continue. We're going to the 8th year of this discussion. I want to acknowledge Shelley Pomerantz for having helped bring this event to a long way to where it is today. She's right there. And I want to say that it's so interesting, I don't know, much more than interesting. It's extraordinary to see how much this kind of panel, this discussion that we're having today, going back to its origins, how much things have changed, how much the world have changed, how much the actual subject, themes and the problems we were trying to deal with, and the sides that we're trying to look at, both sides and so on, how much that's changed. It's not so much through being sides anymore, as you can see from this discussion. We're living in this world. We're all affected everywhere by what's going on. And we cannot disentangle ourselves or try to avoid, facing the realities of what's going on, whether it's Palestine, I think also in, I would say Sudan too, or anywhere, because it's all connected. And I just believe that we have to continue this kind of dialogue, rational, I think civilized, rational, informed dialogue like this is what we need so much more of. And I'm so happy that we're continuing with this event, and I would like to go on with it as well. I want to say one thing though, I grew up like in, just as a little anecdote, born in Palestine. I was 8 years old when Israel became a state. I lived through the euphoria of the state of Israel. My sister Sylvia was with me. We grew up into a socialist state, so socialist. We were going to kibbutzim, even though we're middle class, bourgeois families, kibbutzim for summer camps. We had the scouts, boys and girls scouts. went on outings, singing Russian songs. You just can't imagine how social. Never heard a word of Yiddish, never heard of anything about the Holocaust hadn't come out yet. It was just like that. We happened to be Sfaradim, so okay, so we're accommodated. but then with Likud, with Cherut, it was Cherut originally with Begin. It was a Cherut party that we could never imagine that such a person could become prime minister. They came in, and the right-wing movement started building into Israel. It's never been the same country ever since. But when I came back, having left this socialist, utopia that I left as a child, and I was not socialist or anything. That was that's what I grew up with in those formative years. Having gone back, I couldn't go back to 1974 because of military service that would have been imposed on me. So 74, I went back, and let me tell you, I said, I can't believe this. I've come back to an American colony. Friends, one of my closest friends talks about shooting, Syrians on the Golan Heights and things like all kinds of stuff, and the materialism and so on. It was a different country altogether. So it's no longer the Israel I knew. But I want to say this, that the people are there, the country is there. One has to face that reality. We have to find ways to learn to live with that, with this, and always never forget the people of Gaza, because they're the ones who need all this sympathy and support. Thank you.
I think we've run out of time, and I think that's a great way to close this. I want to thank the panelists here, Danae, Yaakov, Mustafa, and Ihab. And I want to thank you.
Karim. And Karim.
Thank you. And I truly want to thank you for taking the time to come and for not doing nothing. So thank you as an audience for being here, for being so wonderful. I appreciate you all. Please watch Rule of Stone. Please buy Yaakov's books, buy Mustafa's books, read Hab's poetry. These are an extraordinary group of people, and thank you. Danny, where can people watch the film?
I don't know. We're trying to.
But is it on video?
No, it's actually quite important, because now that no Cinematheque is willing to screen the film for reasons that I do not understand yet, but I just have to accept, we're probably going to four-wall the screening and pay for the screening ourselves, and it would be wonderful that once. No, actually, I'm going to say something really very impolite here, but Cinema Politica will not be willing to show my film. No, because I, for some reason, and we spoke about it a little bit, offend the Palestinian, representation in this city that is fighting against normalization. So, yeah, it's a problem. So it's kind of politically incorrect to show my film right now, and I hope that this will change, because one of the things that is really important to say is that the forces that we are fighting are so much bigger that it's only by listening and alliances that we can actually stand any chance at fighting anything in this world or being true to ourselves. So that is something I can,
I'm here.
My children are here.
There's nothing new with that either, I can tell you.
My three children.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Gabriel, for your sponsoring this event. Thank you all for coming.